The portion of Chukat is an amazing parsha. It has many interesting concepts that we can discuss. Starting from the very beginning, we speak about the mitzvah of the Parah Aduma of the red heifer. And here the Torah speaks about someone who came in contact with a dead body and now is spiritually impure. And in order to become spiritually pure, they need to take the ashes of the red heifer and sprinkle those ashes on that individual. And this is done through a Kohen who takes the ashes and sprinkles it on the individual that was impure, and now that person becomes pure. We find that pertaining to the red heifer, it says that Asher lo ola aleha oil, that the red heifer must be a cow upon which an oil, which means a yoke, never was placed on its neck. We find that the word oil, which means yoke, is missing the letter Vav. And the question is, why is the word oil missing the letter Vav? The Yalkut Shimoni and the Zohar explain that the Parah Aduma, the red heifer, alludes to Esav. Esav was born with red hair, and he was very red-skinned. And this represents fire and passion. And the people of Esav did not accept the yoke, the full yoke, upon themselves. The people of Esav represent the people of Rome, the descendants of Esav, and therefore the letter Vav is missing in the word oil. So the question is, where did that letter disappear to? Where did it go to? Furthermore, we look into the parsha, and the Torah tells us that at the end of 40 years, after Miriam dies, so the Jews now have no water, because the rock of Miriam provided water in the merit of Miriam. Now that Miriam died, the rock stopped giving water. So God tells Moshe Rabbeinu, go and speak to the rock. V'dibartem el hasela. Speak to the rock. And what does Moshe do? Moshe Rabbeinu hits the rock twice. And because he hits the rock twice, God says, you're not going to go into the land of Israel. Just to expound on this for a few moments, why is it the first time, at the beginning of the 40 years, when the Jews needed water, God tells Moses, hit the rock? Now at the end of 40 years, does God tell Moshe to speak to the rock? Why the change? Why at the first time hit the rock and now speak to the rock? And the Yalkut Shimoni says that at the beginning of the 40 years, the rock represented a young child. A young child, sometimes you have to hit. He doesn't understand. When you speak to him, don't do that, don't do this. You train him by giving him a little patch. However, after 40 years, you become an adult. An adult, you don't hit, you don't patch. An adult, you must speak to the adult. And therefore, 40 years later in the desert, Moshe Rabbeinu was not supposed to hit the rock, but rather speak to the rock. We find that the Alter Rebbe in Tanya, and the Tanya was written in the late 1700s. He writes that when a Jew suffers, it's like a father who is a tzaddik that hits his child. So when a Jew suffers, God, the tzaddik, so to speak, is giving us a little patch to clean us up and to inspire us to do tshuva. So the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, asks a question on the Tanya, how come the Alter Rebbe writes, it's like a tzaddik who hits his child? Why doesn't the Alter Rebbe say like a chassid that hits his child? And the Frierdiker Rebbe says, the answer is that a chassid does not hit his child. So already, in the time of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, the philosophy was that a chassid should not hit his child. And the Rebbe, in the beginning of his Nesius, his leadership, wrote a letter where he says that we find today already that hitting children is counterproductive. So perhaps we can say that the reason why in this generation we should not be hitting children, but rather we should talk to them and inspire them, but not use our hands, even on little children. Because today the souls of all the Jewish people are the souls that have been reincarnated many, many times. They are old souls. These are the souls that are ready to go into Jerusalem, into Israel with the coming of Mashiach. And therefore, when it comes to these old souls, these ancient souls, you can't hit them, you have to speak to them. In contrast to the Jewish people that left Egypt. At that time, it was the birth of the Jewish people. The souls were young. And therefore, at the very beginning, yes, you're allowed to hit the rock. But now, after 3,300 years later, these souls are not young anymore. They're old, mature souls, and therefore, v'dibartem, you have to talk to the children and not, God forbid, hit the children. So Moshe Rabbeinu hits the rock. And God tells him, because you hit the rock, you're not going to go into the land of Israel. Why does Moshe Rabbeinu hit the rock? So our rabbis tell us he hit the rock to protect the Jewish people. Because God wanted Moshe to speak to the rock so that to tell the Jewish people, look, this rock that does not get reward for doing a mitzvah follows my word. How much more so you, the Jewish people, who get reward for doing my mitzvahs, you must follow my word. And Moshe Rabbeinu did not want the Jews to be embarrassed by a rock. And therefore he hit the rock and said, look, God, even the rock has to be hit. And therefore don't blame the Jewish people. So Moshe Rabbeinu puts his life on the line, and he hits the rock, and now he's told, you are not going to go into the land of Israel. Continues the parasha and says, what does Moshe Rabbeinu do next? He dispatches diplomats, and he sends them to the king of Edom. And he tells the king of Edom, we want to enter into the land of Israel, and we want to go through Edom. And you should know, we're not going to go to the right. We're not going to go to the left. We're not going to go into the fields. We're not going into the vineyards. We're going to go derech hamelech. We're going to go the path of the king. And you should know our history. We suffered, and we were in Egypt, and we were slaves. And all we want to do is go to our land in Israel and live as a peaceful country and a peaceful nation. We don't want to make any problems. We don't want to wage war with you. So let us take a shortcut and go through your land. We're going to go through derech hamelech. We're going to go through the path of the king. And the king of Edom answers these diplomats that Moshe Rabbeinu sent, and he says, do not come here, lest we come out with the sword against you. Again, the diplomats respond. And they tell the king of Edom, you know what? We're not going to go derech hamelech. We're not going to go the path of the king. We'll go on the highway. We'll go far away from all the people. All we want to do is bypass the country so we can get into the land of Israel. But we won't put any lives in jeopardy. And without having a chance to respond, the king of Edom came out with his army, with brutal force, against the Jewish people. And so the Jewish people had to turn around and go another way. Why is it that the first thing the diplomats said was, we will go derech hamelech, the path of the king, and then they changed their tune and said, we're going to go with the highway. What happened over here? What was the change? And what was the response of the king of Edom? If you come into my country, I'm going to go against you with the sword. Simply say, no way, Jose, you cannot go into my country. But the story is as follows. Moshe Rabbeinu, after he was told he will not enter into the land of Israel, he realized there's only one way for him to go into the land of Israel. And that is if Mashiach comes. And Mashiach will bring the Jewish people into the land of Israel, then he too will be able to go into the land of Israel. So how do we usher in the coming of Mashiach? Moshe Rabbeinu remembered the story of Yitzchak and Rivka. How when it came to the blessings, Rivka wanted Yaakov to receive the blessing, and Yitzchak wanted Esav to receive the blessing. And ultimately, the breakthrough was that Yaakov will receive the blessing, and he will use the blessing to refine Esav. That is the Hasidic approach to the story of the blessings. That yes, Esav will eventually receive the blessings, but via Yaakov. And that is why after Yaakov was in the house of Lavan for 20 years, he meets up with his brother Esav and he says, Im Lavan Garti, you should know I lived in the house of Lavan, V'tayag mitzvah shemarti, and I fulfilled all the 613 commandments. You should know, Esav, my brother, I am ready for Mashiach to come. I have done my job. Are you ready? And here it says that Esav was there with 400 men. And he realized that Esav was not ready for Mashiach to come. So years later, now that the Jews leave Egypt and they're about to go into the land of Israel, so once again, Moshe attempts to see if Edom, who is the grandchild of Esav, is now ready for the Mashiach. So many years have elapsed. And so he goes to Esav and he says, you know, I want to go through your land and I want you to come with us. We're going to bring Mashiach together. And we're not going to go to the right, we're not going to go to the left, we're going to go straight the path of the king. Are you ready? And Edom says, don't come here lest I come out against you with the sword. No, I am not ready. We are still Yedayim Yedei Esav, we are still the hands of Esav. We are still murderers, we are still into war, we are still into blood. We're not ready for Mashiach. We are not totally refined yet. We're not ready for the Mashiach to come. So the diplomats of Moshe change their tune and say, okay, fine, we won't go through the path of the king. We'll go through the highway, we'll bypass your country. You don't want to join us to bring Mashiach, let us bring Mashiach ourselves. We'll do all the work for you. And here too, Esav said, no, Mashiach is not coming for us, and he ain't coming for you. And therefore they went out against the Jews. And therefore we find over here that the Jewish people tell Edom, we're not going to go to the right or to the left. For this is a statement for all history. In the days of exile, the Jewish people are going to have temptations to go to the right and to the left. We are told that the right represents Islam. Islam is kindness. Abraham, who's the father of Chesed, of kindness, gave birth to Ishmael. And Ishmael started the people of Islam. And Avraham was kind. And therefore his child came from that extension of kindness. And therefore Islam is on the right. To the left, you have Esav. He's the child of Yitzchak. Yitzchak represents Gevurah, severity, criticism. And Esav is the child, the offspring of Yitzchak. And so he is on the left side. That represents strength, power, which is the religion of Christianity. And so Moses declares that even though the Jewish people are going to go into exile, but they will always go the path of the king. They will continue to hold on to their Torah. They will not go and convert to Islam, and they will not go and convert to, God forbid, the left side of the Christians. However, we find that the word small, which means left, has an extra vav. For the vav of oil, because they lacked the yoke of God, what happened? The people of Esav took the yoke of God and they brought it into the left side. The left representing brutality. And we know that in the 11th, 12th, and 13th centuries, there were the Crusaders that went on their crusades and killed hundreds of thousands of Jews. And they did it with the left. They did it through war. They did it through bloodshed. And the Vav, the letter Vav, looks like a sword. They did it through murdering hundreds of thousands of Jews. And still in all, our response is that we are not going to go to the left. We're not going to go to the right. Brutality is not going to change us, nor will over kindness and temptation inspire us. But rather we're going to go the path of the King. We're going to follow in the ways of the Torah. However, the bottom line is what the Rambam says. And that is, the Rambam says, and he gives us words of encouragement. The Rambam says in the Laws of Kings that even though JC committed tremendous bloodshed, and yet the world called him the Messiah. They called him the Mashiach. And he was the furthest thing from Mashiach, because Mashiach is supposed to bring peace and tranquility and love and harmony to the whole world. And this fellow brought bloodshed and destruction, and he perverted the entire Torah. And similarly he says, pertaining to Muhammad from Islam, that he too was called the Messiah, and he too brought about bloodshed. So why then did God make these two people known as the Messiah? And the Rambam says we don't know God's ways. But one thing we could say, that the fact that these two people were known as the Messiah, now the Messiah has become known to the entire world. Everybody believes in the Messiah. Everybody wants the Messiah. Everybody's awaiting the Messiah. The only confusion is who the real Messiah is. Therefore, says the Rambam, now that the real Mashiach will come and he will say, I am here, and he will teach the world ethics and values, and he will truly bring peace to the whole world, spontaneously, everybody will join the Mashiach. Everybody will come together, and the whole world will be at peace. So this is the message of this week's parasha. Each one of us has within us a spark of Moshe Rabbeinu. And therefore, because we have a spark of Moses in us, our job is to hasten and to initiate the coming of Mashiach. How do we do this? We do this twofold. Number one, by oil, accepting the yoke of God, to make sure that the word oil is spelled Aleph, Vav, Lamed, that we should have the entire yoke of God upon ourselves, as the Jewish people stated at Sinai. Naaseh v'nishma, we will do, and then we will study your Torah. They accepted upon themselves the yoke of God, oil malchus shemayim, and also the yoke of Torah and mitzvos, the yoke to fulfill the Torah and all of its commandments. That's number one. So if we want Mashiach to come, and we want to hasten Mashiach, we have to start increasing in acts of goodness and kindness, to do one more mitzvah, and one more mitzvah, and one more mitzvah. As the Rebbe has told us, that the Rambam says that the world is on a scale of 50% good deeds and 50% bad deeds. One more good deed can come and tip the scale to salvation. The second thing is we have to speak to the rock. And that is to talk to our brothers and sisters and inspire them to do another mitzvah. And even if we think that their heart is hard like a rock, and they are indifferent and apathetic, and they are ignorant, and they don't care about Torah mitzvahs, don't be dissuaded, and don't be dismayed, and don't be dejected, but realize that if you talk to the stone, if you talk to your fellow Jew, you will see that this stone will produce a lot of water. It will produce life and fertility. And that is the mission of this week's parasha of Chukat, that if you want to bring about an atonement for death, to see v'kitzu v'ranu sheich niyafer, to see that those who lie in the dust should rise and sing, through the coming of Mashiach, then each one of us has this obligation to follow in the footsteps of Moshe, and to go in the derech HaMelech, to go in the path of the king, and not to be intimidated. As it says in the very beginning of the Code of Jewish Law, it says that a Jew has to know not to be intimidated from those who laugh at him. And very often that those who laugh at us are not non-Jews, but our own brothers and sisters. And by the fact that we realize that we have a job to do, we have a mission to do, and that is to go the path of the king and to bring about salvation for the whole world, then we will be strengthened to do what we have to do. And to realize that every Jew has a yearning and every Jew has a desire to come closer to God. No Jew can and no Jew wants to be severed from God. Sometimes there's some dust, and sometimes there's ignorance, and sometimes they are ambivalent. But with love and persistence and true commitment and dedication, and showing your brothers and sisters how beautiful Torah is, and also teaching the 7 Noach had lost to all the nations of the world, through doing this, we are truly taking the path of the King, and we're taking the highway. We're going in a big way with pride and dignity, and this will truly bring about the coming of Mashiach speedily in our days.